I didn't build a legacy to be called someone's support staff. When the 1.8 billion partnership was finalized, I thought this was it. The moment I'd finally be seen. I'd spent 3 years designing the AI model that would redefine diagnostics, pulling 20-hour days, coding through migraines, and debugging through tears. I never missed a deadline, never asked for credit. I thought the work would speak for itself. But at the press conference, under flashing lights and cameras, the CEO smiled and called my brother-in-law the mastermind, said I was the brilliant young technician who helped along the way. Ethan shook hands like he'd built the damn thing himself. I didn't correct them. I didn't scream. I opened one private file, the one they forgot I still had access to. And in that moment, everything they'd stolen began slipping right through their hands. Because I never needed applause. I just needed the truth to have my name on it. The morning of the announcement, I arrived early. My badge still worked. Barely. Security barely looked up as I signed in. I was wearing the Navy suit I'd had tailored 6 months ago. The one I told myself I'd wear the day my work finally got recognized. The day I wasn't just the engineer behind the scenes. The press room buzzed with anticipation. News anchors set up lighting. Executives rehearsed lines they didn't write. Someone handed me a name badge. It read Claire Dawson, technical consultant, not lead developer, not co-founder, just that consultant. Like I'd been brought in to tweak someone else's vision. I held the badge for a full 5 seconds before pinning it on. I didn't want to cause a scene. Not today. I'd waited 3 years. I could wait another hour. They ushered everyone in. Rows of reporters, investors, the Lucas history of health. Even the international press showed up. After all, the tech had already made headlines. A neural AI capable of diagnosing rare diseases in under 60 seconds, with a 93% accuracy rate. They called it Project HALO. I called it the code I'd built in my apartment over too many sleepless nights to count. I stood at the edge of the stage behind the side curtain, waiting for the cue that never came. Instead, I heard my name, once, through the mic, from Ethan. My sister-in-law Claire helped a lot with the back end, he said, laughing like it was some charming anecdote. But really, this vision, this dream, it came from wanting to save lives through elegant, intuitive design. We at YD Tech believe in making technology feel human. He had no idea what the code did. He once asked me if API was short for Apple. Yet there he was, in a tailored gray suit, being applauded for my architecture. And next to him, the CEO, Mr. Langford, nodded and smiled for the cameras. We're proud to announce this historic 1.8 billion partnership with the World Health Syndicate, he said. And we owe it to our visionary leader, Mr. Ethan Day, Chief Innovation Officer and Architect of ALO. The cameras flashed. Ethan waved. Someone handed him a gold-framed certificate with my patent number printed across the top. No mention of me. Not even a footnote. My throat tightened. I kept my face calm. I stood behind the curtain and clapped when everyone else did, feeling my palms sting from the force of my own restraint. Then the slideshow began. Charts, performance reports, forecasted market value. All of it was pulled from the very folders I had named, organized, and color-coded. Every graph had Ethan's initials in the corner. Lucas had been replaced, and when the press asked how the AI handles conflicting datasets, he said, "It's proprietary intuition. It just knows." I almost laughed out loud. Instead, I turned around and walked out of the press room. No one noticed. Not even Ethan. Not even the CEO. I walked into the server lounge, the place no one else ever went, where the work actually lives. I sat in the dark, turned on my laptop, and opened one folder. It was titled LT, Redemption. Inside it every commit, every voice note, every security clause they signed but never read. One clause buried deep in the original licensing agreement. Condition 7A. It was tied to my biometric login. They thought I was just a name on a file. But I was the architect of the firewall, the recovery system, and the fail-safe. The next slide in their presentation was about legacy. Lucas had just begun. The server lounge was cold. Always had been. That was where I'd written most of the core ALO architecture. Between pizza boxes, late-night debugging, and the hum of old ventilation units no one ever fixed. I opened my laptop. It took 5 seconds for the fingerprint reader to recognize me. Another 5 to decrypt the file. Condition 7A. It was buried inside the original IP protection protocol. A clause I wrote at the request of our legal consultant, back when we still called ourselves a garage team. The clause had been signed by every executive at YD Tech, including Mr. Langford and, by proxy, Ethan, back when he still thought back end was a chair placement. It was legal, it was real, and it was still live. Trigger breach of authorial attribution in the public domain. Effect lockout of presentation systems, auto-revert ownership credentials, and IP review under audit. Basically, if they ever tried to take credit for my work in a public-facing forum without naming me as co-creator, the entire architecture would shut itself down. I hadn't touched this protocol in over a year. But when I saw the image of Ethan on that giant stage, holding the plaque with my patent ID, that was enough. I didn't even have to hit enter. Just opening the file in my biometric profile initiated the countdown. 15 minutes. Just enough time to watch the storm brew. I walked calmly back to the side of the press room. They were still talking. Ethan had brought a child up on stage, a cancer survivor, and was giving a speech about tech with heart. The audience was eating it up. The first flicker was small. The projection behind him stuttered for a moment, froze, then resumed. Nobody seemed to notice. Then came the second. The company logo glitched, just for half a second, before fading back in. That's when I knew it was working. I stood in the back now, behind the sound booth. A junior AV tech looked confused, tapping furiously at a touchscreen. Slides not responding, he muttered to himself. This isn't in the script. 10 seconds later, every screen in the room went black. There was a pause, an uncertain breath. Then the static rolled in. A high-pitched buzz echoed through the speakers. A red banner appeared across the center projector. The AV tech stepped away from the console. A few people laughed nervously. One of the investors turned to the CEO and whispered, "Is this a demo?" Ethan leaned forward toward the mic. "We're experiencing a brief technical hiccup. We'll be right." The microphone cut mid-word. Feedback screeched through the room. Cameras lowered. Phones came out. Someone in the back murmured, "Was this a cyber attack?" Behind the stage, Mr. Langford pulled out his phone and started tapping. Then frowning. Then swearing, because none of the internal apps worked. All team drives were inaccessible. Presentation folders wiped, and then, one by one, the tablets in the front row, those issued to high-tier partners, began showing a message. "Are you out ERR Siratar mess may teach, RS Hal, temporarily suspended. IP holder under review." I watched Ethan pale under the lights. He looked toward the booth, toward the AV guy, toward Mr. Langford, and finally, toward me. We locked eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, he looked scared. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply turned around and walked out. By the time I reached the hallway, people were already murmuring, "Did she do that? She, the real creator, wet, wasn't her name on the prototype license." I stepped into the elevator, calm, the same calm I'd held when I watched them pitch my demo code as early drafts from our marketing team. Let them wonder. By the time they realize the system isn't just broken, it's sealed, they'll also realize the only person who can unseal it is me. By the time I got home, the headlines were already shifting. Not tech blogs, not official news outlets, yet. But the whispers had started. A Reddit thread, a Twitter post from a leaked internal source, and then a Medium article with an oddly specific title. Why? Done system failure may have been an inside job. Was it personal? I didn't even need to scroll down to know what they were implying. No one said my name, but they didn't have to. They said, technical staffer with known ties to the original Halo team. They said, female relative of Mr. Ethan, A. Engish. They said, resentment, a professional jealousy, emotional instability. And then came the kicker. A fake message supposedly sent from my corporate account, timestamped an hour before the crash. Let's see how well he performs when the lights go out. I never wrote that. I never sent it. But it was already being screen captured, shared, and memed. Within 24 hours, someone leaked a voice note, heavily edited. You could hear my voice, barely, saying phrases like, "Take it down. He doesn't deserve this," and "not anymore." What you couldn't hear was the rest of the conversation. The part where I was reading lines from an early version of the code during a QA session. No one cared. People didn't want the truth. They wanted a villain, and I was perfect for the role, the bitter, brilliant woman who couldn't handle being outshone. Except they had one problem. I had the receipts. All of them. Every line of code. Every git commit. Every time-stamped project document was stored in the external drive I kept offline, untouched by the company's mainframe. I had screenshots of Ethan requesting access to backend repositories he didn't have clearance for. I had an audio file of him in a meeting 2 months ago, asking our junior engineer, Sophie, to draft an investor deck. Without Claire's name this time, it confuses the branding. I even had email logs showing he modified Halo's original demo file and renamed it Hi. A. The night before the press conference. And, most importantly, I had Condition 7A's audit trail. Every time they touched the system, every attempt to override ownership was recorded, including a request filed from Ethan's IP address, trying to backdate his credentials to appear as co-architect of the model. The signature block on that request, Langford's. They thought they had erased me. But they didn't know I kept copies, multiple, in separate drives, one in my home, one mailed to myself in a sealed envelope, notarized, one in the hands of the only people who believe me without needing explanation, Lucas and Tanner. 2 of our former security engineers, Quiet, smart, unimpressed by power, the type who didn't flinch when I showed them the evidence. This is enough to trigger a full ethics review, Lucas said, flipping through the files. More than that, Tanner added. This could void the entire partnership contract. I nodded. But we don't go loud. Not yet. I want facts, not fire. We got to work. That night, we posted 4 anonymous images on an account called IP Traced Archive 1, a screenshot of the original licensing contract, signed by me, date stamped, listing me as sole author of Halo's framework. 2. A commit log showing my code contributions from 2 years before Ethan even joined the company. 3. A system access log, Ethan's credentials failing 3 times to override my protection protocol. 4. A fragment of the demo interface, clearly displaying Claire, admin owner, in the system metadata. No hashtags, no commentary, just one caption. Truth doesn't need volume. Just timing. The post went viral in under an hour. Reddit threads flipped. Journalists started asking questions. Tech influencers dug into the metadata and confirmed the timestamps were real. By morning, a few internal employees had reached out to me quietly. I knew something was off. One wrote, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up," said another. I didn't blame them. Fear makes people small. I'd spent years being small, but not anymore. I didn't reply to the comments. I didn't go on TV. I didn't write a tell-all. Instead, I walked back into that same server lounge, sat in the same chair, opened the same folder, and began preparing for what came next. Because while they were busy crafting stories, I was curating truth. The night after the post went viral, I couldn't sleep. Not from adrenaline. Not from fear. From something colder. Clarity. That kind of sharp-edged calm that only arrives when you stop asking for justice and start preparing to extract it. I sat in the living room, lights off, laptop glowing in front of me. My tea had gone cold. I didn't touch it. I wasn't looking for new evidence. I was revisiting old archives. Folders I hadn't opened since ALO was still just a prototype running on a cloud server in my apartment. One folder was labeled, Meeting to Audioed Internal Veen 3Y. I clicked it. A voice recording crackled to life. If we move forward with public-private licensing, we'll need a built-in audit clause. Sure. We'll call it a contingency. Something legal but low profile. And if attribution's ever breached, then ownership reverts, temporarily, until the audit clears. To whom? To Claire. She built the damn thing. My breath caught. I remembered that meeting, 3 years ago, in the old office conference room. Still smelled like printer ink and instant noodles. We were finalizing the Halo ethics charter. I'd asked, half-jokingly, what happens if someone tries to steal credit? Mr. Langford laughed, then said, let her hold the keys. If someone screws up, she'll know what to do. He hadn't realized that the audio system in that room auto-archived. But I did. I sat back, heart thudding, not with emotion, but with power. Not the kind that roars, the kind that waits. This clause, this recording, combined with Condition 7A, wasn't just symbolic, it was legal, binding. Because in the final charter submitted to our patent council, there was a line, in case of attribution breach or ethical compromise, primary control of ALO shall be reassigned to the original systems architect until full review. They had buried that clause in the appendix. I had printed it, filed it, forgotten it. Until now, the timestamp was clear, the voices were recognizable. The charter was signed by Mr. Langford, our CTO, and, most importantly, by the government liaison from the Lucas History of Health. It wasn't a hypothetical. It was real. I forwarded it to Lucas and Tanner. Tanner called within 5 minutes. This alone could nullify the licensing contract with Y. What about control? I asked. Lucas answered this time, calm and precise. If that clause is activated, you're not just the lead developer anymore. You're the acting compliance trustee. I stared at the ceiling. For 3 years, they'd called me background, ghost assistant, and now, I was the clause. By morning, the conversation had changed. Press outlets had begun retracting their earlier speculation. New headlines popped up. Was the wrong name on the 1.8B deal. Anonymous source leaks clause transferring Halo control to engineer Claire Dawson. But internally, they weren't staying silent anymore. An emergency board meeting was scheduled for Friday. The memo said, to address governance concerns and review compliance. No names, no accusations. But I could read between the lines. They were trying to contain it, to patch the leak with polished statements. Too late. Because now, 3 government health agencies had reached out for comment because the investors, especially the Swiss group, wanted clarification regarding IP attribution. Because the university where Halo was originally prototyped sent me a private message. We have your name listed as the only project owner on file. Let us know if you need documentation. I did. And they sent it. PDFs, signatures, lab notes, even photos of me running the original neural net demo in a lab coat 2 sizes too big. The evidence wasn't just piling up. It was forming a wall. And behind that wall, I was finally protected. I sat alone that afternoon in the old glass server room on floor 9, the same place Ethan once told me to avoid because it wasn't photogenic. That room had watched me grow. I clicked through my folders, paused over a document I hadn't opened in years. ILO origin logs. It held the first 17 days of system development. My notes, my corrections, my doubts, my dreams. I read one line and almost laughed. Day 12. Finally got the network to stop thinking a mole is a tumor. Might be onto something here. No one had ever read that but me. Not even Ethan. Especially not Ethan. He had been in Singapore when ALO passed its first diagnostics test. He didn't even know the name. ALO came from the initials of my late mentor. They thought I'd forgotten all this, that I'd moved on, that I'd stay quiet. But I hadn't, and I wouldn't. Because for the first time since ALO began, I had the data, I had the claws, I had the floor, and come Friday, they'd have to face all of it. Friday, 8:03 a.m. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the same charcoal gray blazer I wore the day I defended Halo's final prototype. I hadn't touched it in over a year. It still fit, except now, so did the silence. There were no victory speeches, no dramatic rehearsals. Just a file folder in my hand and a line I was finally ready to cross. By 84:07, I was outside the boardroom. The door was slightly ajar. I could hear murmurs, low, clipped voices, the kind people use when they're pretending they're not afraid yet. I stepped in at exactly 900. The conversation stopped. 10 board members sat around a long walnut table. Mr. Langford was at the head, fingers steepled, eyes half lidded like this was just another quarterly report. Ethan wasn't there. I didn't ask why. 3 empty chairs lined the sidewall. One was mine. I didn't sit in it. Instead, I placed my folder on the table and said, simply, before we begin, I'd like to enter 3 items into the record. No one stopped me. I opened the folder. 1. A printed copy of Condition 7A, complete with original signatures and audit logs. 2. A transcript of the audio file from 3 years ago, where Mr. Langford agreed to revert Halo control to me in case of ethical breach. 3. A notarized statement from the university lab confirming my sole authorship of the Halo architecture. I slid the documents toward the board secretary. She accepted them without a word. Across the table, a board member in a navy tie cleared his throat. Forgive the question, but this isn't retaliation, is it? I looked at him. Calm, steady. No, I said. It's restoration. Silence. Not hostile, not confused, just real. Then Mr. Langford finally spoke. You've certainly stirred quite a storm, he said, voice tight. Public image is a delicate thing, Claire. This kind of disruption. I didn't cause the disruption, I replied. I prevented a falsehood from becoming policy. He leaned back. You think this is about credit? No, I said. It's about custody. He blinked. Custody. ALO isn't just a brand, it's a living system. One that detects early, stage neurodegenerative disorders with 93% accuracy. If its architecture is compromised, if even the origin is misrepresented, it risks everything: funding, credibility, and lives. Another board member, the youngest, glanced at the documents, then back at me. And the system shut down? Triggered by protocol. Fully legal. Signed by everyone in this room. Nobody argued. Then, finally, the chairwoman, Miss Albright, spoke. Her voice was calm but cool. We've reviewed your submission, Ms. Dawson, and the vote is unanimous. As per the ethics clause in the 2020 agreement, interim custody of Project ALO and all related intellectual property transfers to you, effective immediately. She turned to Mr. Langford. A's for leadership decisions. Your involvement in backdating credentials and signing off on unauthorized attribution will be reviewed at the next session. He didn't react at first. Then his lips thinned. He stood slowly, straightened his blazer, like that would keep his dignity intact. You've made a mess, he muttered. I met his gaze. No, I said softly. I uncovered one. He walked out without another word. And just like that, the boardroom didn't belong to him anymore. I stayed until the end of the session. They reviewed succession protocol, confirmed audit committees, discussed the investor statement that would go out Monday morning. No one raised their voice. No one challenged my presence. No one dared to call me assistant. At 10:43 a.m., the final agenda item was review of leadership appointments and acknowledgement of IP custodianship. Project AL to Claire Dawson, effective immediately. I signed the document, for the first time with a title that matched the weight I had carried for years. When I left the building, the sky was overcast, the kind of weather that usually made me anxious, waiting for rain that may never come. But today, it felt honest. I didn't walk quickly. I didn't check my phone. And when I reached my apartment, I found a courier envelope waiting at my door. No note. Just a slim, sealed folder with a return address from Professor David Whitmore, my first mentor and original co-author of Halo's earliest white paper. I opened it slowly, sitting on the floor with my shoes still on. Inside was a handwritten letter. Claire, A. If you're reading this, then the world finally caught up to what I've always known. You never needed a spotlight. You only needed a foundation that wouldn't vanish beneath your feet. Keep the work alive. Not for legacy, for clarity. Halo was never theirs to parade, it was yours to protect. I didn't cry, but I did sit there longer than I meant to, letting the silence settle around me like armor. Because the fight wasn't over. The fallout hadn't even begun. But I had my name. I had the truth. And finally, I had the room. That night I didn't sleep. But not from unrest. From stillness. After I read Professor Eldred's letter, I placed it inside my journal. One I hadn't opened since the first Halo prototype failed its third benchmark, and I nearly quit. I wrote just one sentence under the date. Not everything we lose deserves to be found again. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The sky was the soft gray of beginning. I brewed tea. No news, no email, no panic. Just breathe. At 6:42 a.m., someone knocked on my door. It wasn't a courier, it was Ethan. His eyes were red, not bloodshot, raw. He wore the same jacket from the press conference, only now wrinkled, sleeves too long like he'd borrowed it from a version of himself that no longer fit. He didn't wait for me to invite him in. He just stepped past the threshold and stood there, in the center of my living room, silent. Then he dropped something onto my coffee table. A printed copy of the licensing clause. Signed, highlighted, annotated with my initials. You had this the whole time? He said. Not angry, not even bitter, just hollow. I didn't reply. He kept going. You let me walk into that room. Let me speak. Let me take everything. No, I said, finally. You took everything. I just stopped cleaning up after you. He sank into the chair opposite mine, elbows on knees, eyes unfocused. I thought if I just kept going, he whispered, I could earn it after the fact. Become the thing I pretended to be. That's not how legacy works, I said. He let out a small, broken laugh. Funny, you were always the quiet one. But somehow your silence was louder than all my speeches. I didn't smile. But I didn't flinch either. He looked around the apartment. I saw the shelves lined with old notebooks, models, tangled cords, and a half-eaten sandwich I'd forgotten. Was I ever going to be good enough? He asked. I looked at him. Not as a rival, not as a thief, but as someone who'd been handed a lie and chose to believe it. You weren't supposed to be me, I said gently. You were supposed to be honest about not being me. He bowed his head. No defense, no denial. Then he stood. I've resigned, he said. Effective immediately. I nodded once. Good. Before he left, he turned and said the thing I didn't expect. You were never invisible, Claire. We just refused to see you because your light didn't ask permission. And with that, he was gone. I spent the rest of the morning rebuilding Halo's system structure, one line at a time, not to erase the past, but to protect the future. I restored author credits, secured access protocols, and rewrote the welcome line on the admin panel. It used to say, "Welcome to Halo." Now it said, "Built with silence, powered by truth." I didn't send press releases. I didn't demand apologies. I didn't need them. Because in the end, the loudest vindication isn't a headline. It's knowing that when the storm passed, the structure still stood, and your name was carved in the foundation. That afternoon, I opened my window and let the air in. The city buzzed below, horns, footsteps, a world moving forward. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want a celebration. I wanted space. Space to lead on my terms. Space to create without permission. Space to become something that wasn't forged in defense but designed with intention. That night, just before I turned off the lights, I reread the professor's final line. Halo was never theirs to parade. It was yours to protect. And I whispered back, not for him, not even for me, but for every girl they called, just the assistant. I know. I never forgot, and I never will. Then I slept, not because it was over, but because I'd finally begun.